I'm not sure how it happened, but there I was, throwing my jacket on, grabbing the keys off the counter, and heading out the door. It wasn't like I had planned on doing it that day, but you know how it goes sometimes. Life just throws you a curveball, and you either swing or just stand there looking dumb. So I swung. My aunt had just been released from the hospital. They told me she was coming out after a week-long stay, and they'd arranged for someone to pick her up. At least, that's what they said. But as the day went on and the phone calls stopped coming, I realized no one had bothered to make the trip. Not even her son, who lived a good hour away. Typical. Now, I don't mind helping family out. That's what family does, right? But this was pushing it. I mean, we're talking about a hospital release, not a trip to the grocery store. She wasn't exactly in the best shape, and the thought of her sitting alone in some hospital lobby just irked me. So I grabbed my things, slammed the door behind me, and hit the road. I didn't even think twice. I'd drive the 100 kilometers, that's about 62 miles for you 9 metric folks, just to make sure she didn't end up stuck waiting in some dingy waiting room because no one could be bothered to show up. I'm not trying to play the hero here, but I figured it was the right thing to do. I kicked the truck into gear, and the sound of the engine roaring the life felt like a sign. The sun was starting to dip low, and the air had a bite to it, like fall was creeping in early. This kind of drive wasn't anything new to me. In fact, it felt kind of familiar. I'd done it a million times before. Running errands, picking people up, helping out when it wasn't convenient. It was like the story of my life. But still, there was something different this time. I had a weird feeling in my gut as I cruised down the highway. Maybe it was the fact that I wasn't exactly expecting a thank you. Not that I needed one, but knowing the family, I could already hear the silent complaints. Why didn't so-and-so do it? Why is he the one always stepping in? That kind of nonsense. But it didn't matter. My aunt needed me, and that's all that mattered right now. As the landscape whizzed by, wide open fields, lone trees standing like sentinels on the edge of the road, and the occasional farmhouse tucked away in the distance, I let my mind wander. The last time I'd seen my aunt was right before she went in. She had been fine, or at least she had seemed fine, but hospitals had a way of sucking the life out of you, didn't they? There was something about 'em, the sterile smell, the white walls, the endless beeping of machines that just drained a person. I wondered if she had been scared. She never showed it, but hell, I knew her well enough to see past the tough exterior. I mean, we all had our moments. She was tough as nails on the outside, but beneath that, there was this soft side to her that no one really got to see. It was probably because she always played the role of the strong one, always the protector, always the one who had it together. I shook my head. She'd probably be in a mood when I picked her up, but that was okay. I could deal with it. I always did. The road stretched on, and the sun finally slipped below the horizon, leaving behind a faint purple glow. The headlights of my truck flickered on, cutting through the twilight. I leaned back in the seat, my fingers drumming lightly on the wheel as I thought about how long it had been since we'd really talked. Was she different now? Had the time in the hospital changed her? Would she even appreciate me coming to get her, or would she just give me that look, the one that said she could have done it herself if she had the chance? I guess I'd find out soon enough. Before I knew it, I was halfway there. The little town started to come up on the horizon, the kind of places where everyone knew your name even if you hadn't lived there in years, the kind of places where you could go into the diner and get a cup of coffee and people would ask if you wanted the usual. It was almost time. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the nerves that had crept up on me. But still, something felt off. I just hoped I wasn't walking into more trouble than I was ready to handle. The drive was quiet, too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful, but the kind that makes your brain start running in circles. I had already passed a couple of small towns, the kind that had nothing but a gas station and a bar where the old-timers gathered to argue about who was going to win the football game this year. The truck's engine hummed under me, almost like it was trying to tell me something. Or maybe it was just my mind, trying to break the silence that had started creeping in. I pulled into the parking lot of the hospital just as the last bits of daylight faded completely. The place was quieter now. The staff was wrapping up their shifts, and the lobby had that feeling of a place that was almost empty, like it was waiting for something to happen. I could feel the weight of the moment, but I ignored it. This was just another stop on the long list of things I'd done for family. Hell, it wasn't like I was out here saving the world, but there was something about this that had me on edge. Maybe it was the fact that I didn't really know what I was walking into. I parked the truck and killed the engine, the abrupt silence in the cab making my thoughts louder. Was she going to be okay? What if she didn't want me there? I shook the thought off. She was family, and family didn't leave other family hanging, right? I hadn't been this worried about her in a while. Not since we were kids, and I was the one who always ran to her when I needed advice or just someone to listen. As I stepped out of the truck, I could feel the cool night air bite at my face, sharp and crisp. It was the kind of weather that made you want to pull your jacket tighter and keep moving, like it was pushing you forward. I walked up to the doors, the automatic ones sliding open without a sound, and stepped into the sterile, artificial light of the hospital lobby. There were a few people milling around, talking quietly or waiting in chairs, probably just trying to get out of there. I walked past them and headed toward the main desk, where a nurse was typing something on a computer. She looked up as I approached, her eyes briefly flicking over me like she was running a quick mental check. Guy in his late 20s, casual clothes, probably not in a hurry. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat but not unkind. "I'm here to pick up my aunt," I told her, immediately feeling dumb for having to say that out loud, like anyone in this place would have no clue who my aunt was. The nurse typed something in her computer, then paused. "She's still in her room. You're going to want to head down the hall, take a right, and it'll be the second door on the left. I'll let them know you're on your way." "Thanks," I muttered, already starting to turn away. As I walked down the hall, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, I felt that tension building again. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, some dramatic reunion or some deep, tearful moment, but I didn't really think it would be either of those things. It would probably just be her, sitting in a chair with that look on her face. You know the one, the "I'm fine" face, the one that says everything and nothing at the same time. I reached her door and my hand hesitated over the knob. What was it about this place that made everything feel so off? The walls were too white, the room was too quiet. It was like nothing here felt real, like this wasn't even her room. It was just some place where people came to wait for the next chapter. That's all it was. People came in, got patched up, and left. But no one ever really left. It was like the hospital ate them up and spit them out, and they came back different. I knocked lightly on the door, and there was a muffled sound from inside. Then I heard her voice. "Yeah, come in." I opened the door and stepped in. There she was, my Aunt Kathy, sitting in a chair near the window, the blinds half drawn to block out the dimming light of the evening. She looked like she had been in the hospital, you could tell. Her hair was a little messier than usual, and she had that exhausted look in her eyes. But still, there she was, tough as nails, as always. She glanced up at me, and I could see that quick flash of recognition, the kind that told me she knew what was coming next. I wasn't sure if I should say something or just let her speak first, but I decided to play it cool. "Hey, Aunt Kathy, ready to get out of here?" I asked, giving her a half smile. She didn't smile back. Instead, she just gave me that look, the one that said she didn't need anyone's help, but she was stuck with it anyway. "I was getting ready to leave, but it's nice of you to show up," she said, her voice dry but not unfriendly. I just nodded, feeling the awkwardness settle in. This was going to be one of those moments where words didn't really cut it. The only thing that mattered was that I was here. But was that enough? Was showing up really all that was needed? I wasn't so sure anymore. I could feel the tension in the room. And to be honest, it wasn't coming from me. I was just trying to play it cool, keep things light. But Aunt Kathy? She wasn't having it. She didn't even get up from the chair when I stepped inside. She just stayed there, leaning back like she was waiting for the next person to tell her what to do. I'd seen that look before, the "I've got this" look mixed with a hint of annoyance, as if someone, anyone, telling her to get up and go was just adding insult to injury. I could tell she was tired. I mean, how could she not be? A week in the hospital, a bunch of doctors poking and prodding, nurses coming in every few hours to check on you. Nobody comes out of that chipper. But still, she wasn't exactly jumping for joy when I walked in. It was like she was holding on to something that made her stubborn as hell, even if it was just a feeling of not wanting to be anyone's burden. "Do you need help with anything?" I asked, trying to break the ice. My words felt weird, like I was saying them to someone else, not her. But it was what I was supposed to ask, right? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just glanced at me from over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing just a bit, the same way they always did when she wasn't sure if she was about to be pissed off or just tired. "I'm good," she said, her voice sounding rougher than usual. "You can go ahead and get the car. I'll grab my stuff." I didn't fight it. I knew better than to push her. When Aunt Kathy said she was fine, she meant it. At least that's how it seemed to me. I wasn't about to argue with her. So I just nodded and walked back out to the truck, hoping like hell that she wasn't going to make a scene in front of the staff. The last thing I needed was for the hospital to get involved in some drama that wasn't mine to deal with. I got in the truck and started it up, the engine rumbling beneath me like it was getting ready to take off. I didn't wait around, though. I turned the heat on, rubbed my hands together for warmth, and tried to distract myself from the weight of what was happening. Sure, picking her up was a simple thing, but I couldn't shake this feeling that it was the beginning of something bigger than either of us had bargained for. The hospital parking lot was quiet, and I didn't even have time to think about the cars or people moving around me. I'd already seen the looks the nurses had given me when I walked in, like they knew what was going on, like they knew the drill. It wasn't the first time someone had to pick up a relative from a hospital, but it sure felt like I was part of some kind of unwritten script. As I sat there, the minutes ticking by, I started to wonder what the hell I was even doing. Was this really just a routine thing for me? Driving to pick up Aunt Kathy like it was some kind of favor I owed her? I didn't have an answer to that, but one thing was clear. I wasn't leaving until she was ready. I checked the rearview mirror a couple of times, waiting for her to come out, but she didn't. Instead, I just sat there, tapping the steering wheel lightly and letting the time pass. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It had already been 10 minutes. Maybe she was taking longer than expected, or maybe she was just in there thinking about how to make an exit, trying to figure out the least dramatic way to leave the hospital. Finally, the door swung open, and there she was. Aunt Kathy, looking as tired as I'd ever seen her, but still somehow managing to look like she could take on the world if she had to. She was wearing that hospital gown, the one that never seemed to fit right. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and she had a bag slung over her shoulder with what I assumed were her things. She was moving slow, but steady. When she saw me, she gave a quick, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "Yeah, I'm ready now." No smiles, no big gestures, just her doing what she had to do to get out of there. I put the truck in gear and backed out of the space, keeping it slow as I pulled toward the exit. She climbed in, threw her bag on the seat beside her, and buckled up without a word. I wasn't sure what she was thinking, but I knew she wasn't going to open up just because I was sitting next to her in the truck. The road home stretched out before us, and I couldn't help but wonder where the hell this was all headed.
She'd always been the strong one, the one who kept things together when everyone else was falling apart. Now it was like she was holding on to something, maybe even something she didn't know how to let go of. The silence in the truck was thick. It wasn't the comfortable kind of silence that you get with people you're close to. No, this was the kind of silence that made you feel like there were words hanging in the air, just waiting to be said, but neither of us was willing to say them. A couple of times I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye, trying to get a read on her, but she kept her gaze out the window, like she was lost in her thoughts or just trying to block everything else out. I wasn't going to push her, though. I knew better. We'd both been through enough to know when it was time to let things sit. I took a deep breath and shifted gears, focusing on the road. I wasn't sure how long the drive would take, but it didn't really matter. We were headed back, and that's what mattered right now. The rest of it could wait. But as we drove in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that this ride was just the beginning of something bigger than neither of us was ready for.
The road seemed to stretch forever under the dim glow of the headlights, and I couldn't help but feel like we were on autopilot, both of us. I kept my eyes on the road, trying not to look over at Aunt Kathy too much. I didn't want her to feel like I was watching her every move. Hell, she'd probably hate that. She was quiet as hell, which wasn't really surprising, but it wasn't just her usual silence. This time, there was a weight to it, a heaviness that I couldn't quite figure out. She had always been the one to hold the family together, the one who made sure things didn't fall apart when everyone else was too busy with their own stuff. So now, with her looking all worn out and drained from whatever hospital ordeal she'd just been through, it was hard to know how to act. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words just wouldn't come. Every time I thought of something, I second-guessed myself. What if I said the wrong thing? What if she snapped? Or worse, what if she didn't snap at all and just stayed in that damn silence forever? I glanced at her again. She was staring out the window, her face lit up by the occasional passing streetlight. For a second, I almost thought I saw a hint of emotion in her eyes, a flicker of something just beneath the surface. Maybe it was the reflection from the window, or maybe it was just me reading into things, but I couldn't ignore it. For as long as I could remember, Aunt Kathy had been the rock of the family, the one person who always had an answer, who always knew what to do. She'd raised me after my parents split, taken me in when things got tough, and somehow kept it together when the rest of us were barely holding on. So seeing her like this, broken, tired, vulnerable, felt like I was looking at a stranger, and I hated it. Not because I didn't care about her, God, I cared, but because I didn't know how to help her. I didn't know how to fix it. "You good?" I asked, glancing over at her again. My voice sounded too loud in the truck, like it had been hanging in the air for too long. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just nodded, still not looking at me. Her hands were folded in her lap, her knuckles white. It was like she was holding on to something, trying to keep it together. "All right," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe some reassurance, a simple "I'm fine," or even a snarky comment. But no, there was just that silence. I focused back on the road, trying to shake off the feeling that I was failing at this, failing at helping her. The miles clicked by, one after another. I tried to keep the speed steady, glancing at the clock to see how long it had been since we left the hospital. It wasn't that far to her place, maybe 40 minutes or so, but in the silence, it felt like I was driving through an eternity. I reached for the radio, the only thing that felt like a good distraction. I didn't want to put on some loud, upbeat music, though. It would just make things feel even more awkward. So I dialed it to a classic rock station, hoping something familiar would fill the space between us. The first song that came on was a slow one, some old tune that I knew she liked. For a second, I saw her react. Her fingers twitched like she was about to reach for the volume knob, or maybe sing along.
but then she stopped, like she had caught herself, and suddenly that old guard went back up. I didn't press her, but the song made me think about the past. A lot of stuff had happened in that house over the years, a lot of things unsaid, a lot of fights, too. But there was also a lot of good. There were birthdays, summers when we'd sit out on the porch eating watermelon, and holiday dinners where she'd make too much food and still insist on sending people home with leftovers. I wanted to believe she was still that person, but I wasn't so sure anymore. I wasn't sure about a lot of things. We hit the outskirts of town, the familiar landmarks beginning to show up on the side of the road, the little strip mall, the gas station where I'd stopped more times than I could count, but it all felt different now, like everything around us had changed, even if nothing looked different on the surface. "Almost there," I said, trying to sound like I wasn't in my own head. "Yeah," she said softly, "I know." It was almost eerie how quiet she was. Maybe she didn't know how to say what was on her mind. Maybe she didn't even want to say anything. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this whole thing was less about me picking her up and more about something neither of us was ready to face. The truck cruised down the road, my headlights reflecting off the houses that lined the streets, all of them looking the same, but the truth was, everything felt different now. Like it wasn't just the house that had changed, it was everything. The old routines, the things we took for granted. When I pulled into the driveway, I could feel a shift in the air. And Kathy didn't move right away. She sat there for a second, looking at the house, her eyes distant. "You good to get out?" I asked, already turning the engine off. She didn't answer first. Then, after a long pause, she finally nodded. "I'll get my stuff," she muttered, grabbing her bag from the seat beside her. I stayed in the truck for a second longer, watching her shuffle toward the front door, her steps slow but steady. Was she ready to face whatever was inside that house, or was this just another chapter she'd have to turn the page on without knowing what the next one would bring?
The driveway was empty, except for my truck, and the place looked, well, it looked like it always had. Same old shutters, same cracked flower pots on the porch, same rusted mailbox at the end of the walkway. But as I sat there, just watching Aunt Kathy drag herself inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the same house I'd grown up in. I don't know why, but it felt like everything had shifted. Maybe it was her, maybe it was me, or maybe it was the quiet, the kind of quiet that settles into the corners of your mind and makes you question everything. All I knew was that I wasn't sure what was waiting inside that house, and that scared the hell out of me. I sat there for a second, the engine still off, just watching her. I'd never really had to think about it before, but something about tonight made me realize how much that place had been our constant. The house had been the same through all the ups and downs, through the holidays, the birthdays, the fights and the laughs. But tonight, it wasn't. It was just a house, just four walls and a roof, holding the weight of all the years we'd spent there. But now, it didn't feel like home anymore. I grabbed my jacket off the passenger seat and slammed the truck door behind me. I wasn't about to stand out in the cold like some idiot. If she was in there, I was going in too. By the time I reached the front door, she was already inside, the door barely cracked open as she shuffled through. I stood in the doorway for a second, unsure of whether I should just go in or give her space. But she didn't ask for space, did she? Hell no, she didn't ask for anything, ever. I pushed the door open wider, stepped inside, and let out a breath. The smell hit me first, the stale air that had been locked in for a week, like no one had been living here for a while. Aunt Kathy was already at the kitchen counter, her back to me, pulling a glass from the cupboard. She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me at all. "You need help with anything?" I asked, trying to break the ice again. "Nah, I'm good," she replied, her voice flat but not unkind.
It was the kind of response she always gave, but this time it felt different, more distant. I watched her as she filled the glass with water, the sound of the faucet running echoing in the silence. The kitchen, once the heart of the house, felt lifeless. There were no smells of food cooking, no clutter on the counters, no noise of family hanging around the table, just emptiness. I could feel it in my gut, the way the house had lost something. Maybe it was the laughter we'd all shared here. Maybe it was the way we used to gather around, arguing over the stupidest stuff, just enjoying each other's company. That was gone now, and I hated it. "So," I said, trying to keep the conversation going, "you need anything? You want to eat? Or we could watch something. I don't know." She finally turned to face me, the glass of water in her hand. Her eyes were tired, but there was a hardness to them I hadn't noticed before. She set the glass down on the counter, wiped her hands off on her pants, and leaned against the counter. "I'm fine," she repeated. "I don't need anything." I didn't push it. If she wanted to shut me out, that was on her. But it stung. I thought we were beyond this, beyond the quiet, beyond the walls we built around ourselves. But she was making it clear that she wasn't ready to let any of that go, and I wasn't sure I was ready to accept it. The silence stretched out between us again, and I had to force myself not to start pacing. I had never been good at standing still when things were awkward. Hell, who was? "So, what's the plan?" I asked, trying to act like this was no big deal, like we were just two people casually talking about life. Her eyes flicked to me, and for a second I saw that look again, the one she gave when she was trying to figure out what to say to me, the one that said she was thinking hard about whether to tell me the truth or just brush it off. "I'll figure it out," she said finally. "I don't need anyone telling me what to do." Ouch. It wasn't harsh, but it wasn't soft either. It was a wall, a damn brick wall. I felt the sting of her words, but I didn't let it show. This wasn't about me, it was about her, and if she needed space, I'd give it to her. She'd made it clear she didn't want my help, so I stepped back, giving her the space she clearly wanted. "All right, well," I said, rubbing my neck again, trying to ease the tightness that had started there. "I'm gonna head out. You know where I'll be if you need anything, okay?" She nodded without saying a word, her eyes back on the countertop as she fiddled with a paper towel. I didn't stick around. I turned and headed back to the front door. As I pulled it open, I glanced back one last time, but she didn't look up. The door clicked shut behind me, and the quiet slammed me like a brick wall. I stood there for a second, just listening. No sounds of anyone moving around, no sounds of life, just the cold silence hanging in the air. I got back into the truck, and I don't know why, but I couldn't bring myself to drive away. I just sat there, staring at the house, wondering what the hell had happened, what the hell had changed. A part of me wanted to turn around and go back inside, to say something, anything to break the tension, but I didn't. Maybe this wasn't the kind of thing you could fix with words. Maybe there was more to it than I was seeing. But what the hell was it? And was I ever going to figure it out?
I sat there in the truck for what felt like forever. The engine was off, but the truck still hummed in the cold, like it was waiting for something to happen. I stared out at the house. The porch light was on, casting long shadows that stretched across the yard. Nothing was moving. Not a single light flickered in the windows. It was like the house was holding its breath. I could have driven away. Hell, I could have driven all the way back home and just pretended tonight didn't happen. But I didn't. I couldn't. The night wasn't over yet, and I couldn't leave until I figured out what was going on with her. Or maybe what was going on with me. Either way, it wasn't sitting right. I reached for my phone, checked the time, and sent a quick text to my buddy Jack. Just something casual so I could push my brain somewhere else for a second. "You busy tonight? I need a distraction." I hit send and stared at the screen. No response, no surprise. It was a Tuesday, and Jack was probably halfway through a six-pack by now, watching some game I didn't care about. But that wasn't the point. The point was I needed someone to talk to, someone who wasn't family, someone who didn't know the weight of the situation, someone who could make me laugh or at least make me forget that my aunt was sitting inside that house holding on to a pain I couldn't even touch. As I stared at the screen, I heard the creak of the front door behind me. My heart skipped. I wasn't expecting her to come outside, but there she was, standing in the doorway, looking like she was about to say something. I wasn't sure if I should go back inside. It didn't feel right, but it didn't feel wrong either. So I just sat there for a second, watching her. She didn't say anything. She just stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, her face unreadable. I took a deep breath, opened the truck door, and stepped out. If this was going to be awkward, fine. If she needed something, I'd be there. But I couldn't just keep sitting here waiting for something to happen. I had to go to her. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep the tone light, like I hadn't just spent the last 10 minutes wrestling with myself about what to do. She didn't answer at first. Her eyes shifted to the ground, then back up at me. There was something in her eyes, something that wasn't just the exhaustion or the frustration that had been hanging in the air all night. It was vulnerability, something I hadn't seen in years. "I don't know what I'm doing, kid," she said softly. The words hit me harder than I thought they would. She never called me kid unless she was serious. And when she said it, it wasn't like she was treating me like a kid. It was like she was reaching for something, something she hadn't admitted to herself yet. I walked up the porch steps, stopping just a few feet away from her. The cold air between us didn't feel like a wall anymore. It felt like a crack, like there was something on the other side. "You're not alone," I said, my voice softer than I expected. I hadn't meant to say it like that, but it was the truth. You never were. She didn't respond right away. She just took a deep breath and looked back into the house, her gaze flicking to the living room window like she was seeing it for the first time. "I don't know how to fix any of this," she finally muttered. I stepped closer, unsure if whether I should reach out or just stand there. The silence between us was thick, but I wasn't about to push her. She had to come to this on her own. "You don't have to fix everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just take it one day at a time. You don't need to have all the answers right now." She looked at me for a long second, like she was studying my face, and then, for the first time that night, she gave me a faint smile. It was much, but it was there. "I wish it was that easy," she said, turning away from me and looking back inside. "I just want things to feel normal again." Normal. Yeah, I don't think any of us really knew what that word meant anymore. I didn't. I couldn't even remember what life had felt like before everything started shifting. The house didn't feel normal. The drive didn't feel normal. Hell, I didn't even know if I was being normal right now. I had no idea what normal was anymore. She took another step back inside, and I hesitated for a second. I wasn't ready to leave her like this. Not yet. "Hey," I called out, stepping toward the door. "If you need anything, anything at all, you know where to find me, okay?" She paused, her back to me, but she didn't turn around. "I know." I didn't know what else to say. I wasn't expecting her to open up right now. This was going to take time, and maybe that was all I could offer. Time. I turned and walked back to the truck, climbing into the cab without looking back. The engine rumbled to life again, and for a moment I just sat there staring out at the house. It was still, silent, the porch light casting long, soft shadows across the yard. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something had cracked open. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe it was just enough to start picking up the pieces. Was it enough to rebuild what we had, though? Or was it just the start of something even messier than I'd expected? I drove home in a fog, the road slipping beneath me without much thought. The street lights blurred together, each one a fleeting moment in time, flicking past in the darkness like old memories. I kept telling myself I'd figure things out, that eventually Aunt Kathy would snap out of whatever funk she was in and things would go back to normal. But deep down, I knew better. I knew that some things didn't just go away. And this, whatever it was between us, between her and the house, between the years of silence, that wasn't going to fix itself overnight. The house felt empty when I got back. It always did. My place wasn't exactly big, but it was quiet, and it was mine. It had been that way since I left home and moved out to do my own thing. I hadn't been back in ages, but it was still home, still had that familiar smell of the couch cushions and the kitchen counter that I could never wipe clean no matter how many times I tried. I dropped my keys on the table by the door and tossed my jacket over the back of the chair, already pulling my phone out of my pocket. There were no new texts from Jack. No surprise. I opened my contacts and scrolled through the list, stopping when I saw Aunt Kathy's name. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe I was expecting her to text me and apologize for the way things had gone. Maybe I thought she'd reach out first, tell me she was okay, that she was figuring things out, that this wasn't going to end like this. But that didn't happen. The phone stayed silent. I set it down on the counter, my mind drifting back to that moment when she'd stood in the doorway, that half smile on her face. The look in her eyes had been strange, too, half defeated, half resolute. I'd seen it before, but not like this. It was like she was holding on to something, something she wasn't ready to share. Maybe it was guilt, maybe regret, maybe just the weight of everything that had happened in the last few months. I ran my hands through my hair and paced around the kitchen, trying to shake off that feeling. I didn't know why it was bothering me so much. This wasn't the first time something had gone wrong. Hell, this wasn't even the first time we'd fought. But this was different. I sank down on the couch, trying to force my mind to clear. I grabbed the remote, but I wasn't really planning on watching anything. I clicked through the channels without thinking, each show coming and going like the flicker of headlights in the dark. None of it felt real. None of it felt like it mattered. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I jerked it out, hoping it was something, anything that could take me out of my own head. It was a text from Jack. "You still awake? Got some beers. Want to come over?" I stared at the message for a second. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was a lifeline. It was normal. I typed back quickly, "Yeah, I'll be there in 15. I didn't even bother to change. I grabbed my keys, slipped into my sneakers, and left the house without a second thought. Maybe it was a dumb move. Maybe I was just running from the shit in my head. But honestly, I didn't care. I needed to get out. The drive to Jack's place didn't take long, and by the time I pulled up, I was already thinking less about Aunt Kathy and more about the cold beer waiting for me. The house was dark, except for the faint glow coming from the living room window. I knocked on the door, and Jack swung it open before I could even get my hand off the doorbell. He was holding a bottle of beer in one hand, a half-eaten pizza in the other. "There you are, man. Thought you fell off the map." "You know me better than that," I replied, stepping inside. We didn't need to say anything else. Jack and I had known each other long enough that we didn't need to fill the space with forced small talk. We just understood. He tossed me a bottle from the counter, and I cracked it open without hesitation. I sank down on the couch, feeling the tension start to ease out of my shoulders. Jack plopped down next to me, cracking his own bottle and leaning back like this was just another Thursday night. "You good?" he asked, taking a long swig. I didn't know how to answer that. "Yeah, I don't know. Just dealing with stuff, you know?" Jack glanced over at me, his brow furrowed. "What's up with Aunt Kathy? She seem off to you?" I laughed, but it wasn't really a laugh. "Yeah, she's different. I don't know, man. She's been acting like she's got the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she won't talk about it. It's like she's shutting down, and I don't know how to help her." Jack took another swig, then tilted his head like he was thinking about something. "You know, some people don't want help. Sometimes they don't even know they need it. They just get stuck."
I get that, but she's family. She's always been the one to take care of me. I don't know how to just let her be. I hear you, Jack said, his voice softening a little. But sometimes you gotta let people figure their own shit out, man. You can't carry all their weight for them. It'll crush you. I was quiet for a minute, letting his words sink in. Jack wasn't wrong. He had a point. I couldn't fix everything, but that didn't stop me from wanting to try. I wasn't used to seeing Aunt Kathy like this. I wasn't used to seeing her broken. So you just leave her to it? I asked, shaking my head, unsure of what I was even saying anymore. No, man, you're still there for her, Jack said, his voice steady. You just don't have to fix it. You just gotta let her know you're around no matter what. Sometimes that's all they need. Jack was right, though, wasn't he? Sometimes all you could do was show up. But what if showing up wasn't enough?
The next few days crawled by. I found myself checking my phone a lot, hoping for a text from Aunt Kathy or even a call, but nothing came. It was like she had fallen off the face of the earth. I'd check in with her every day, sending simple texts like, "How are you doing?" or "Need anything?" And still, I got nothing, just a long, painful silence. I went back to work the day after I dropped her off. The regular grind, the usual mundane crap. Same old customers coming in, same old routine. It wasn't like I had anything else to focus on, but damn, it felt like I was walking through a fog. I kept thinking about her, wondering if she was okay, if she needed someone, if I should be doing more. But I didn't know what more I could do, what more she wanted me to do. It wasn't like I could barge in on her and fix everything. And besides, she was never one to ask for help, especially not from me. She'd raised me. I knew what she was capable of. The problem was, now I didn't know what she was willing to let herself do. I wasn't sure if she was burying whatever was wrong or if she was just trying to pretend everything was fine. I tried calling her once. It rang 4 times before the voicemail picked up. I hung up without leaving a message. I wasn't about to make things more awkward. If she needed me, she knew where to find me. Work didn't feel like an escape, but it was a distraction. I threw myself into it because I didn't have a better option. My manager, Doug, kept walking around like a damn cheerleader, trying to hype up the team for some sales goal we didn't even need. But it was the same every year, like he had some script he followed in his sleep. A part of me just wanted to tell him to shut up, but I kept it to myself. There was no reason to stir up trouble. That night, after work, I got back to my place, grabbed some takeout, and crashed on the couch. I hadn't even bothered to turn on the TV. The silence in my apartment felt almost comfortable at first, but then it just started getting louder, louder and louder until it felt like a damn pressure cooker in my head. It was the same kind of silence I'd been living with since my parents split, only now it had a different weight to it, like there was something more to it, something I was missing. I grabbed my phone again. No new texts. I ran my thumb over the screen, debating whether I should reach out again. But what would I even say? Hey, are you okay? That was such a dumb question. Of course she wasn't okay, and I knew that, so why keep asking? I leaned back against the couch, staring up at the ceiling. What if this was it? What if everything had just changed and I couldn't bring it back? What if I had waited too long? What if she wasn't coming back? I glanced at my phone again. Nothing. I closed my eyes and sighed, setting the phone on the coffee table. Maybe I wasn't supposed to fix it. Maybe that was the point. Maybe I had to let her figure it out for herself, even if it meant she pulled away from me. I was still stuck on the thought of her, sitting in that house, not saying anything, not asking for help. She'd always been the one to give me advice, to tell me what to do when things went wrong. But now she was the one who needed the advice, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. The next morning, I decided to drop by her place. I didn't call first. I didn't text. I just drove. I figured if I just showed up, maybe that would make a difference.
Maybe it would break whatever this weird distance was between us. I pulled into the driveway, the morning sun barely creeping over the horizon. The house looked just as it had when I'd left it, quiet, still, almost like it was holding its breath. But today, the silence felt different, more like a waiting game, a game I wasn't sure I was winning. I sat there in my truck for a few minutes, staring at the front door. Was this a bad idea? I didn't know, but I couldn't just sit around waiting for her to reach out. I had to do something. I finally got out of the truck, walked up the porch steps, and knocked. It wasn't a soft knock. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the kind of knock that told someone, "I'm here, and you're going to have to deal with me." For a long moment, nothing happened. No footsteps, no sound from inside. But then the door creaked open just a little, and there she was, Aunt Kathy, standing in the doorway, wearing a faded sweatshirt and sweatpants. She looked like she hadn't bothered with anything in days. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her face unwashed. But there was something in her eyes, something like she was torn between being happy to see me and pissed off that I showed up unannounced. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "You got a minute?" She didn't answer immediately. She just stared at me for a second. Then she stepped aside, letting me in without a word. I stepped into the entryway, looking around the house. It was like I'd walked into a ghost town. The place was still and quiet, the only sounds being the faint hum of the fridge and the rustle of the curtains in the breeze. The living room was empty. The kitchen was untouched. It was like she'd stopped living here a long time ago. I turned back to her. "You good?" She didn't look at me. Instead, she crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe, not quite blocking me from leaving, but not really inviting me in either. "I'm fine," she said. It was the same thing she always said, the same thing I always knew was true. But I didn't push her, not this time. I just stood there, letting the silence hang between us, knowing that she wasn't going to open up unless she was ready. "I'm here if you need to talk, Kathy," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. "Whenever you're ready." She nodded, but she didn't say anything, and I didn't push. I stood there for a second longer, trying to read her, trying to figure out what was going on behind those tired eyes, but I didn't know. I left without saying another word. I didn't get answers that day, but maybe I wasn't supposed to. Maybe this wasn't about getting answers. Maybe it was about waiting for her to find the courage to speak, and waiting for me to stop pretending like I had all the answers. It had been a week since that day. I hadn't heard from Aunt Kathy. I hadn't tried calling again. I kept thinking about her, but I also kept reminding myself that it wasn't my job to fix everything. I could only be there when she needed me, and maybe that was enough. But still, the waiting, it was starting to feel unbearable. I couldn't keep holding my breath, wondering what was going to happen next. I spent the last few days going through the motions of my life, trying to find something that would distract me. I went back to work, hung out with Jack a couple of times, even ran some errands I'd been putting off. But every time I did something, my mind would drift back to her. That damn house, her silence, the weight of everything left unsaid. I didn't know what was worse, her pulling away, or me being too scared to ask what the hell was really going on with her. One evening, I was sitting on my couch, zoning out, flipping through random shows on Netflix, when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Another text from Jack, probably. He was always sending me memes or updates on some new local bar that was opening. But this time, it was a message from Aunt Kathy. "Can you come over? I need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long moment. That was it. No explanation, no preamble, just those 6 words that hit me harder than I expected. I almost couldn't breathe for a second.
I jumped up off the couch, not bothering with shoes, barely grabbing my jacket. I just grabbed my keys and left, slamming the door behind me. I didn't even have time to think about it. I didn't know what she wanted to talk about, but I had no doubt it was going to be something big, something we'd been dancing around for too long. The drive felt like a blur, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I was nervous, unsure of what was waiting for me at her door. What would she say? Would she finally open up? Or was this just another round of silence and walls? When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the front door cracked open a little. She was waiting for me. I parked quickly, turned off the truck, and jogged up to the porch. My heart was thumping in my chest. The air felt thick, like everything around us was holding its breath. I knocked once, and the door opened. Aunt Kathy stood there, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying, and for the first time in a long time, I could see how much she'd been holding back. Without saying a word, she stepped aside and let me in. I don't know where to start," she said, her voice unsteady. I didn't know what to say either, but I didn't need to. I stepped into the living room, waited for her to speak. She sighed, rubbing her eyes before sitting down on the couch. I took a seat across from her, giving her the space she needed. "I've been keeping things from you," she said quietly, her voice cracking. "Not because I don't trust you, but because I didn't want you to see me like this." I didn't interrupt her. I knew it was hard enough for her to admit this, so I just waited. "I don't know when it started," she went on, looking down at her hands, "but somewhere along the way, I stopped being the person I wanted to be, and I didn't know how to fix it." She paused, and I could see the pain in her face, the guilt. "I don't know if I'll ever get back to who I was before, but I'm trying, and I needed you to know that, because you deserve to know." It felt like everything inside me clicked into place. The weight I had been carrying around for days, the unanswered texts, the silences, the uncertainty, it all made sense now. "You don't have to do it alone," I said quietly, leaning forward, trying to make her understand. "Whatever you need, I'm here. You don't have to hide from me, Kathy. Not anymore." She met my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the smallest hint of a smile. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I sat there for a long time, not saying anything else. There wasn't a need to. The weight in the room had shifted. She was ready to face it, ready to talk, ready to heal. I didn't know what the future held or how long it would take her to fully open up, but I knew one thing for sure. We were going to be okay. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be worth it. As I left that night, I couldn't help but feel like we had crossed a threshold together. The hardest part, the part where we finally stopped pretending, was behind us, but now we had to rebuild. And rebuilding didn't happen overnight, but it was a start, and sometimes that's all you need. What do you think? The journey we go through with family can be messy, unpredictable, and sometimes painful, but it's also what keeps us connected. If you've ever had a moment where you had to figure out how to show up for someone who wasn't ready to ask for help, this story might have resonated with you. Want to read more stories like this? Or maybe share your own experience? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and feel free to reach out if you want to talk more about family, tough conversations, or how we can support each other through life's biggest challenges. Thanks for reading.